Welcome to our posts. Today, we will see stories of r/malicious compliance. My ex ghosted me, so I found a way that he will have to see my face every day. This was a while ago, and I'm over him now. But about 2 years ago, I dated a coworker. I know now that that was a mistake. I was barely in my 20s when this happened. We started as friends and hung in the same circles until we couldn't deny the attraction anymore. A couple months into dating, we were planning on moving in together and maybe even getting married one day. We were inseparable, and he was so affectionate with his words and actions. But then I got a promotion that required me to go out of state. We decided to do long distance for a while, and I would keep a lot of my stuff at his place until I moved back. Then we would live together. Unfortunately, a month into long distance, he ghosted me. There was no indication that things were going wrong, so I was devastated and blindsided. I had never been in a relationship before, so he was my first heartbreak. But the most annoying part was that he refused to acknowledge my existence, even as just friends. We were in similar group chats, and he would just skip over my comments. He would go out of town when I came in town, and he would get mad at me for hanging out with our mutual friends. I found this out through the grapevine. It was one of the few things I knew about him after the breakup. Eventually, I moved on and met someone new, but I was still very hurt that someone who I once considered a great friend would just cut me out of my life for no reason. So here's where the petty revenge comes from. We have a company homepage that shows different slides of employees doing things like receiving awards or special events. The homepage plays on the TV screens at work as well as the computers. One day, the company sent an email asking for pictures with a prompt. So I chose the pretty picture of myself I could find and a nice fluffy paragraph to go with it. Now the ex that ghosted me has to see my face every time he walks into work and opens up his computer. A revenge a year in the making. Edit. When I said I met someone new, that was later down the road, and I am not with the someone new anymore. Sorry for the confusion. The revenge and the dating a new person didn't happen at the same time. Next story. Selfish husband never knew. My now ex-husband was very selfish, always putting his wants before mine. He was also a hypochondriac. After we started dating, we decided to move in together, and he insisted I rehome my cat because he said he was allergic. I don't think he was allergic, but I think he believed he was, so I stupidly rehomed my cat. Fortunately, I found a very good home for her, so I'm okay with that. But it was incredibly selfish for him to ask me to do that. After we were married, he suddenly decided he was allergic to our goose down pillows and comforter. I loved them. I tried to argue with him, telling him that we had been using these for over a year. So how could he suddenly be allergic? And he just got very angry and told me I didn't care about him. So I went to Bed Bath & Beyond and bought hypoallergenic pillows and comforter. I made sure he knew I had done this, and I put the pillows on the bed and the comforter in the duvet cover. The next day, when he wasn't around, I replaced them with the real thing I had hidden in the closet and took the cheap stuff back to the store since I had left the tags on. We were together for several more years, and he never knew. Edit. Some of you are missing the point that this sub is called Pettyrevenge. I am fully aware that my actions were not mature or the most healthy way to handle the situation, so there's really no need to point that out. Next story. My ex-husband screwed himself out of a grand life. My ex-husband was a problem. I didn't mind the myriad of health conditions he had, but the fact that he refused to take care of himself was the real issue. Especially when his problems caused me to lose the very little sleep I was going to get. I worked for a terrible corporate security firm that really doesn't care about its employees. I was the single field supervisor in my region, and on top of my regular 40-hour work week, I also was called on emergency to fill open positions. This was during the height of COVID as well, which eventually put me at a regular 8,100 hours per 7-day work week. The money was incredible, but I was miserably exhausted. At the time, my husband was working part-time and receiving SSI and spending all of his income on himself, video games and fast food against his doctor's orders, while I paid both of our shares of the bills. car payment, insurance, phones, etc. This went on for about 3 years, getting progressively worse as time went on. Despite the amount of money I covered for him, I still managed to bump my credit by paying off my car and saved enough to buy a house. Nothing too fancy, but it's a 2-story with an unfinished basement, plenty of space, decent-sized yard, creek, and really cool neighbors who constantly invite us over to drink and play pool. While moving, I was still working 80+ hours and couldn't spare time to help much, but I paid for the moving truck and dinner for anyone willing to help us pack up and move. I asked my then husband to make sure everything gets packed. He packed all of his own belongings, then the household furniture, then ignored whatever didn't fit, was late returning the moving truck, and I had to call about the fee, which they were very kind enough to waive considering my circumstances. The result was that the majority of my stuff, my roommate's stuff, and my brother's stuff didn't fit in the moving truck. My brother was making trips every day after work to pick up a carload and bring it home. I asked my ex-husband to please do the same, and he agreed. 3 weeks later, I finally got a day off. I worked a 12-hour shift and planned to go pack up a few boxes and take them home while I was out. I walked into the house and saw that my ex had literally done nothing. 3 weeks he said he had been moving our stuff and he hadn't touched a thing. I had a meltdown. My legs gave out from shock and I sobbed on the stairs. My roommate and best friend happened to also come in right after me and found me on the stairs. He held me while I cried and assured me he would take a few days off to get everything packed up and moved. He told me to go home and sleep, but I told him I'm already here, so I might as well take a few boxes, since my worthless husband lied to me about doing so. He helped me pack up some things and I drove home. I didn't even bother to unload it. I went inside and collapsed on my bed and cried myself to sleep. Hours and hours later, I finally woke up, a groggy mess, and made my way out to my car to start unloading. Best friend was there unloading his own car with a tired smile. He had been going all day and the sun was setting. Meanwhile, my husband was slacking off in the basement doing who knows what, breaking his promise. We managed to get everything moved, but I had to extend the lease by 1 week and pay a prorated rental cost, all due to my husband's neglect. I was quickly racking up anger at him, and finally, when we were moved, I sat him down and told him how angry I was about the lies and his laziness and what he caused. He started accusing me of all kinds of things in return, like how I wouldn't passionately hug him because of his medical issues. I lost it. I screamed at him that I don't passionately hug anyone. I don't even passionately hug myself, because I'm working the equivalent of 2 jobs with overtime to support his lazy butt and pay for his lifestyle because he wastes all of his money on fast food that he shouldn't even be eating and video games, and because he doesn't lift a single finger to do anything around the house like unpacking, cooking, cleaning, nothing to make my life easier. In fact, he is actively making my life harder. I'm still cleaning up after him when he leaves dishes everywhere and stains in my carpet. So no, I don't want to passionately hug him if he's not going to do anything to earn it. He went radio silent on me for 2 weeks. It got progressively worse. He wouldn't text me or speak to me, wouldn't answer my calls, and eventually wouldn't even look at me. Meanwhile, he's still living off my money. So finally one day I message him to ask him why he's treating me this way, and he ignores me. I ask several other questions, nothing. Finally, I tell him that if he hates me so much, he should just divorce me. He tells me the next day he wants a divorce. I ask him why. You're not going to believe his answer. You don't do enough for me. Oh boy, did he mess up. I tell you, this ding-dong is the absolute most obtuse, smooth-brained, intellectually deficient, situationally unaware, half-witted, opossum-brained clod to say that. I unleashed it. I told him that I do everything for him. I pay for everything so he can live the cushy life. I give him a roof over his head, food in his belly, money in his bank account, because at this point I was also giving him extra money whenever he asked, and taking days off specifically to spend time with him, that I was doing absolutely everything for him. And this is the repayment I get. I got extremely quiet and bucked into his chest, pointing my finger at his face, and told him that since he wanted the divorce, he had to file. And if he even suggested at forcing me to sell my house that I paid for, I would destroy him. I would hire an expensive lawyer, force him into the longest court battle of his life, and take him for every single penny he would ever earn for the rest of his life along with court costs. Then I kicked him out. He moved out. He told me he was moving in with his family a few cities over and asked me to file. I filed in my county because it was closest. He raged at me when he found out. He wanted me to file online and pay an extra $270 out of my pocket since he expected me to pay for the entire thing, and I told him no. A few days later, I got a strange text from him that didn't sound like him. I argued with him, then a confession was made. It was his girlfriend. He had lied to me again and moved to New York from Georgia. She went psycho on me and screamed at me via text about how abusive I am. Long story short, we argued and I told her I wouldn't be speaking to her again. I am filing in my county because I already started the process, and I'm not changing my mind because he lied to me. If he hadn't lied, I might have been willing to file online, but I'm definitely not now. Months go by and finally the date comes. She drove him to Georgia and they were 15 minutes late. I knew this because I was 15 minutes early and the clerk asked if I could contact him, so I went outside to do so. I saw her roll up. I told him she's not allowed inside due to COVID restrictions, but honestly I wouldn't have let her inside because I hate her. He nodded and up we went. We spoke to the clerk and started our paperwork. I have some legal knowledge, definitely a ton more than him due to curiosity and things that have happened to me in the past, so I knew which questions to ask. I know how lazy this brat of a human is. He hates doing anything he doesn't have to do. So I reminded him in front of the clerk that he still had property at my home, and I wanted out of my house. The clerk told him that anything he leaves on my property after a certain date will legally belong to me, and there will be no way of getting it back without my express consent. He asked if he could work something out with me, and I told him no, you'll have to adhere to these legal guidelines, and anything left afterward will be forfeit. Now, while we were together, his blessed mother, may her soul rest in peace despite her son turning out to be worthless past. I loved that woman. She was a saint, and I wanted something of hers to remember her. He had inherited her dining rug. While not worth a lot monetarily, it is still a lovely black and red antique, and I knew he couldn't afford to ship it, nor could he afford to rent a moving truck, nor could he fit it in his girlfriend's tiny crap car. So while he was crying and loading up his mother's belongings, all of which he had left behind when he left initially, I told him I'm keeping the rug. I said this flatly and without feeling. He tried to argue, so I pointed out the obvious, and he conceded. He knew I was right. That rug is one of my favorite belongings. I've begun renovating our unfinished basement, and it currently resides in a lovely guest room that houses my bookshelves, armoire, king-size bed, and 55-gallon fish tank that is not yet home to anything. And for even more good news, I married my best friend, and we've been together for nearly 4 blissful years. On our 5th anniversary, he has agreed to a ceremony, since we were married in a simple ceremony with only 2 witnesses. And for more petty revenge, I still have my ex's childhood art binder, which he cherishes, and I will continue to hold it until he pays me back the $400 he owes me for the brand new tires I put on his car a mere few weeks before he decided he wanted the divorce. It's been over 4 years, man. I'm never giving it back at this rate. And I do send him annual reminders. Next story. Keep pestering me to tie into my fence? Say goodbye to the fence. A previous home I owned had previously been rented, and that tenant had thrown up a quick little chain link fence for his dog. Had the corners right at the corner of the house, just a quick fix that got the job done. I don't have a dog, so fence, no fence didn't matter to me. The day I moved in, my very young neighbor came over and asked, since she ran a daycare from her house that was a whole other nightmare, she'd really like to put up a fence, and to save money could they just tie into mine and save the cost of fencing an entire side of the fence. Now, I may be younger, but I'm not dumb. I knew that if they did that they would be fencing in part of my property, and after a certain number of years with their maintenance of it, they would then own that property between our houses. Now, we're not talking a lot here, the houses were maybe 15 feet across, but if they did that they would own everything up to the edge of my house. Even my air conditioner unit would be on their property. So, I told her this and said no, she cannot now or ever tie into the fence. Mentioned that interaction with my realtor, and she about threw a fit. Seems this person tried asking her the same thing, and she told her the same thing. Now, if this was just a one-time trying her luck thing, it wouldn't be a big deal. But she kept asking off and on for a few years, and I kept saying no. Even the husband came over to ask, maybe to intimidate a single woman, still said no. I even did the research and got the actual property line map that showed exactly where our property lines were. One day, I saw a whole bunch of chain link fencing in their backyard, but not nearly enough to fence all the sides they needed to do. They were going to try and tie in anyway, despite me repeatedly telling them no. So, that night I took down, rolled up the fence, and dug up every single fence post. Now the neighbor had to come out and watch the kids she was supposed to be watching, because my fence wasn't there anymore, so the kids had more avenues to escape. Plus, it took them a bit longer to order more of the chain link fence and posts they suddenly needed. When I sold the house, I gave the new owner, a single man, a care package which included the official property line map and a note to watch those neighbors like a hawk. My realtor, yep, same one. I loved her so much I used her again, knew the entire story, and gave him the rundown as well. Next story. Your food is taking too long when the brand new restaurant is packed. New restaurant just opened, maybe a few weeks in, and of course the place is slammed because everyone wanted to check it out. And being in a not so great area, the food was exceptionally good. I go to check on one of my tables, and this lady screams at me that she ordered her food an hour ago. I don't do confrontations, and thankfully my boss was right there, so I let him handle it. I went to check the ticket, and it had been 45 minutes, along with every other ticket that was waiting. Yes, it has been a while, but the place was new and super busy. What do you expect? It was so awful that tables that weren't even mine were stopping me to ask if I was okay. A year or so later, I saw her in a different restaurant I was working at, and thankfully she wasn't in my section, but I warned my coworker. Thankfully, she just so happened to show up again, and it was my last day. I could hardly contain my excitement. As I left, I stopped at her table and said, "You probably don't remember me, but I waited on you about a year ago at X. You screamed at me in front of the entire restaurant, and I just thought you should know you're a terrible person." The text I got from my coworker after was awesome. The lady started flipping out, demanding to know my name, but all management said was she doesn't work here. Edit. This lady, probably in her 50s, was going to find something wrong anyway. Before the incident, I could hear her complaining to the other two people about how there was no culture in the area. "Woman, you're in Flint, Michigan. People don't come here for the culture." The restaurant lasted about a year. I left after a few months when the only competent manager left. I hope you guys like this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share, and subscribe the channel. Our posts.